Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Understanding Wake Impact Seminar. It's co-hosted by Safe Quiet Lakes and the Muskoka Lakes Association. My name is Ken Pierce, and I'm the president of the MLA. It's my pleasure to introduce Diana Paquette, chair of SQL. Diana has over 30 years experience in senior leadership roles for major technology companies. She's also very passionate about the lakes and is also vice president and a director of the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association, affectionately known as FOCA, and sits on one of MLA's committees. And Diane, over to you to introduce our speaker, please.
Thank you very much, Ken. And thank you for inviting Safe Quiet Lakes to present at this webinar. Safe Quiet Lakes, also known as SQL, and the MLA have been close partners since 2012 and have collaborated on a number of boating safety initiatives. Tonight's webinar is Understanding Wake Impacts on Our Lakes, and I'm thrilled to introduce one of our Safe Quiet Lake board directors, Timothy James, who will be presenting. Tim is a research scientist, a project manager, and a communicator with 25-year history encompassing a range of fields in environmental science and conservation. While his established research career is based in Queen's University, he is also the communications lead for a large European research consortium at the University of Iceland. He has acted as a consultant and volunteer science advisor for both WWF Canada and WWF Arctic Program, as well as running a communications business. On the personal side, Tim is Tim's grandparents came to Halliburton in the 1950s as cottagers, and his extended family can still be found at the family property every summer. Tim is now a full-time resident of Cottage Country, and he is an enthusiastic advocate for the health and sustainable enjoyment of our beautiful lakes, a cause that he also supports by being a board director for Safe Quiet Lakes and the Coalition of Halliburton Property Owners Associations. And with that, I pass it over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Diana. Let me just share my screen here to get this started. There you go. You should be able to see that now, shortly anyway.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much to the MLA for the opportunity to speak to you today and for everybody's attention. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you about a subject that's I think is pretty important, our lakes and enhanced wakes. If this subject is new to you, not to worry. My aim today is to tell you more about these big waves that are generated for wake surfing, as well as their impacts, but also to share with you how at Safe Quiet Lakes we're advocating for the sustainable usage of boats of this increasingly popular sport. I'm just going to pause for a second and turn off my video just so I'm sure to reserve all of the bandwidth for sorry, this always takes me a while to figure out how to make it work. Nope. Oh, here we go. There we are. Okay, that's better. Um, so my understanding is that there will be a Q&A session after the presentation. So if you do have any questions, you can pose them via the Q&A button, which should be at the bottom of your screen. Also, this seminar is being recorded and will be posted on the MLA website along with my slides. So you'll have access to this later on if you're desperate for a recap. So before I get started, I think I owe you a little bit of context. I spent most of my career as a research scientist studying glaciers and ice sheets, but over the last 10 years, I've spent a lot more time working in conservation and science communication. So while I'm speaking to you today from the perspective of a conservationist and communicator, I am also, as Diana pointed out, a lifelong cottager of Halliburton County, and for the last 11 years, a full-time resident. I live on a lake at the southern edge of Halliburton called Gooderham Lake. It's pretty small by all accounts, less than 2 kilometers long and about a quarter of a mile wide at most. But despite its diminutive size, we have a number of these large boats that are engineered to generate enhanced wake, and it's really started to take a toll on our lake and on our ability to enjoy it. In fact, there's a lot of pressures on our lakes these days, not just enhanced wakes. The ecosystems that make Ontario's lakes the recreational paradise we really love are thought to be pretty fragile, and this worries me. So, with that sort of as my motivation, a couple of years ago now, I started working with Save Quiet Lakes, and I think that they have been and will continue to be a hugely influential voice for protecting our lakes and the lake experience. So, it's a real privilege to be working with them. Anyway, on with this show. Our lakes and enhanced wakes, impacts and maybe a solution. So, just a quick overview first to make sure I stay organized. I'm going to start with a quick introduction to Save Quiet Lakes and our mission before I share some of the key results of our recent survey. Then I'll get to the impacts of enhanced wakes, but I want to do so in the context of our lake's natural history, which I think lends an important perspective to the narrative. After that, I want to just quickly go through the legislative framework in Canada for regulating enhanced wakes. There's always a risk that slides dealing with legislation is going to be a little dry. But I think really in this case, it's going to be interesting and helpful, especially to anyone who's struggling with the impact of these wakes on their lake. Finally, I'm going to talk about the exciting work of the Safe Wakes Coalition, who are hard at work to help ensure that these boats are used sustainably on our beautiful but fragile lakes. So, first and foremost, at Safe Quiet Lakes, we recognize that our lakes are treasured and shared by different stakeholders, from residents, visitors, and really all variations of recreational users within, including boating enthusiasts. We are boaters ourselves. We are guided by our simple mission statement to be a leading voice in promoting quiet waterways and respectful boating practices through education, advocacy, and legislative change. And you'll hear me use these terms a lot. We envision that the enjoyment of safe, quiet waterways will be ensured for all and for generations to come. We also believe that positive grassroots conversation and education are important drivers of change. And to this end, we have a number of ongoing initiatives like our Boater Code signs that are posted at boat launches and marinas around Muskoka, as well as a few in Haliburton County. You can read all about our education and advocacy initiatives on our website, so I'm not going to go into that in any more detail now. However, what I would like to take a deeper dive into is one of Safe Quiet Lake's most important initiatives, our survey. While we're driven by our mission and vision statements, it's also important for Safe Quiet Lakes to be data-driven. So at the foundation of all our activities really is our Your Lake, Your View survey, which has been undertaken every 4 years since 2013. And we completed the 2025 survey last summer. Hopefully, many of you here today had a chance to take part in the survey last year. With over 7,000 respondents in 2025, it's the largest lake activity survey in North America. It's important to note that the survey was not designed or executed by us, but rather by Earnscliffe Strategies, who are a professional firm who follows a design strategy similar to that of the National Census. So the result is this credible and powerful data set for lake communities and municipalities to use to better understand and address the needs and interests of their diverse stakeholders. We presented the results of an overview of the survey at a webinar back in November, and the full report is available online. But I think today some of the results will be of particular interest. So I'm going to take this opportunity to go over some of these results. Oops, sorry. Let me first say that this was a fairly involved survey. Anyone here who filled it out will know that it took a good 15 or 20 minutes to complete. So there is an enormous wealth of data in the full report. So I'm only going to scratch the surface here today. So let's first look at one of the fundamental questions from the survey. What lake activities are important for us in cottage country? I'm just going to turn on my laser pointer here. So there's a lot going on in this figure. So to summarize, on the left here, we've got a list of different lake-based activities, and respondents were asked to rate their importance from 1 to 5, where 1 is not important at all and 5 is very important. So essentially the dark red and dark orange on the left indicate important, while the blues on the right indicate not important. And I think this is really interesting. Every year since the beginning of the survey, the importance of relaxing near the water, swimming, and enjoying nature on the lake and shore have topped the list of what's most important to people. Over here on the right, shows that over 90% of people in 2021 and 2025 rated these activities important. And I think this is an overwhelming message. Nearly everyone in cottage country is here to relax, swim, and enjoy nature, which to me was a wonderful thing to learn. Paddling next on the lake was also ranked as important to a significant majority, with about 80% of people identifying this as an important activity. Then these more traditional powerboat activities were important to a pretty big chunk of us, 50% of the people. And then at the bottom here, you have activities that are important to smaller minorities. Here's wake surfing at the bottom, down here at 10% of respondents considering this important. Now, I say only 10%, but this is way more people than I expected. I think I've grown to understand, having worked with people in Muskoka more recently, that these boats are much more popular in Muskoka than they are here. So I suspect that's one of the reasons why this number was so much larger than I expected. But an interesting result. Another fundamental question from the survey was, what kind of watercraft are people using? So here on the left, respondents were asked to indicate what types of watercraft they intended to use in the following year. So maybe this isn't surprising given the previous slide, but you can see here that kayaks, canoes, and paddleboards top this list by a considerable margin. Then we have a significant chunk of respondents planning to use traditional power boats between 24 and 40%, and then PWCs at 22%. But down here, only 7% of respondents were expected to use an enhanced wake boat in 2025. So a pretty small minority, although again a lot higher than I expected for the reasons I've already cited. So to me, the takeaway message here is that the vast majority of respondents are enjoying non-motorized lake activities these days, which is also a really nice thing to learn. What wasn't a surprise to me so much, and probably won't be to you either, is that over the last 5 years, boat wake, and in particular enhanced wake, has emerged as a significant concern for survey respondents. When asked how they thought boat wake in general was changing, 68% of respondents felt that they are increasing. When asked about enhanced wake specifically, the numbers were similar, with 68% of respondents feeling that they are increasing as well. So in particular, this concern was expressed widely and passionately in the open-ended comments in the section at the end of the survey, where respondents were free to speak their minds in their own words. So, what exactly are enhanced wakes and wake surfing anyway, and why is this such a growing concern? So just so we're clear about what I mean by enhanced wakes, these are the wakes that are generated by boats that are specifically designed or modified with ballasts and mechanical devices to create significantly more powerful wake than traditional recreational boats. So the waves they generate are 6 to 12 times more powerful. This isn't to say that traditional boats can't also produce big waves, but the waves from enhanced wake boats are a completely different animal. They need to be powerful enough to propel a rider on the wave who isn't tethered to the boat. Traditional boats can't do this. And I like to put this fact into context. Even in the Great Lakes, except in the biggest storms, the waves there are rarely powerful enough to surf, but with these boats, you can essentially bring a surfable wave anywhere with a boat launch, regardless of how small the lake is. In my opinion, these boats have the potential to be the most significant human impact on our lakes since they were formed some 11,000 years ago. It worries me a lot. When we talk about the impacts of enhanced wake on lakes, you'll often hear us talk about things like lake health and lake ecology and the importance of both of these things. But honestly, over the years, I think this narrative isn't really hitting home anymore. So I started framing these enhanced wake activities in the context of the natural history of Ontario's lakes and how they age through time. I think it helps emphasize the truly dramatic effect that these boats can have. So I'll start with a brief reminder of where our lakes originated. So roughly 11,000 years ago, the ice sheet that covered much of Canada was retreating from southern and central Ontario. This retreat of ice exposed hundreds of thousands of geological and glacially carved depressions in the landscape that quickly filled with water. And Presto, Ontario's lakes were born. They'd been covered by ice for thousands of meters of ice for over 2 million years. And so you can imagine that these lakes didn't have a whole lot in them. They were free of any organic matter and nutrients, and they supported very little life in or around them. There are contemporary examples of young lakes like this today around the margin of the Greenland ice sheet and in the Rocky Mountains, for example. From here, these glacier lakes began a natural succession that would take many thousands of years. So, young, nutrient poor lakes like these, called oligotrophic lakes, are characterized by deep, clear water, scant vegetation, very little algae, and high oxygen. Over many thousands of years, natural processes cause sediments and nutrients to accumulate in the lakes through processes like erosion and decomposition. And this encourages plant and animal growth, which in turn leads to the accumulation of more nutrients and so on. So it's like a positive feedback cycle. Over time, the clarity of the water starts to decrease, and lakes become able to support a diverse ecosystem of aquatic plants and animals. Lakes at this stage of succession are classified as mesotrophic. Many lakes in Muskoka are mesotrophic, including Lake of Bays, for example. My lake in Haliburton is mesotrophic as well. This process of accumulating nutrients and increasing productivity is called eutrophication, and we can liken eutrophication to the process of lake aging. It's an analogy, but it's a nice way to think about it. You have to keep in mind, though, that this occurs very gradually over thousands of years. And in fact, 11,000 years after the formation of our lakes, we still have many nutrient-poor oligotrophic lakes in Muskoka, like Lake Joseph, Skeleton Lake, for example, just to name a few. Eventually, with enough time, aging lakes become eutrophic with high nutrient levels and high productivity that's characterized by excessive plant and algae growth, reduced water clarity, and low oxygen. So it's really important here to point out that while we often think of a eutrophic lake as an unhealthy lake, this isn't necessarily the case. Eutrophic lakes can be in a natural state. For example, a lake that's in the later part of its life. They are important ecosystems in their own right. They support a specific flora and fauna, but typically these lakes aren't great for human recreation, so we don't tend to build our cottages on them. So if your lake suddenly became eutrophic, you'd rightfully think your lake health was very poor indeed. So humans, unsurprisingly, can contribute significantly to this eutrophication process with malfunctioning septic systems like this example here, fertilized lawns and gardens, hardening of shorelines, and removal of shoreline vegetation and other activities that can cause shoreline erosion. Through these activities, we're able to dramatically increase the input of nutrients into a lake, and this accelerates this natural lake aging process. So when this is driven by our activities rather than natural processes, we call this cultural eutrophication. And it turns out that we can actually achieve the equivalent of thousands of years of natural eutrophication over pretty short periods of time. So when we talk about lake health in cottage country, what we're usually talking about is minimizing or preventing this cultural eutrophication. And this, of course, isn't new. We know the potential effects of human activities generally, but especially on lakes, and we mitigate for these impacts by regulating and inspecting septic systems. We protect watersheds with governing authorities, and we have shoreline protection bylaws to maintain the integrity of the ribbon of life around our lakes, and this helps buffer the effects of human activity on shore. And really, we've proven that we can do a reasonably good job of this. If you think about it, our lakes are in pretty good shape given how intensively people use them these days. And this all comes down to good regulation of human activities that could otherwise cause serious problems. So let's go over how enhanced wake can have such a negative impact. To date, a significant volume of research has been undertaken about the impacts of these boats, and the science is pretty clear in this regard. This is a great figure from the last Wilderness Alliance out of Wisconsin. It summarizes these effects pretty nicely. I've broken it down into environment, safety, and economic impacts, color-coded here at the bottom. So starting with environmental impacts, first we've got the effects of the downward pointing prop wash, resulting from the high angle of attack when these boats are in wake surfing mode. This wash from the prop can reach depths of up to 9 meters, stirring up sediment, adding nutrients to the water column, uprooting vegetations, and destroying fish habitat. I have a couple of videos to show you shortly that demonstrate this really nicely. Next up, we have the boat wake itself that can reach heights of over 1 meter. These waves, when they reach shore, they can still be pretty big, damaging loon nests and other important habitat, eroding shorelines, and adding nutrients to the water column, potentially leading to unpleasant and even dangerous algae blooms. Finally, these boats tend to use ballast tanks that are filled with lake water to make them heavier. They can never really be completely emptied, and thus they can contribute to the spread of invasive species if they move from lake to lake. And this isn't unique to wake boats, but they do it as well. Under safety, a typical wave from an enhanced wake boat, once it's some 60 or so meters, about 200 feet from the wake boat's path, can still be over half a meter or 16 inches high. So let's compare that to some of the other craft on the lake. A canoe's freeboard is only about 10 inches. A kayak's around 7 inches or so. Even a small fishing boat can have a freeboard as low as 12 inches. So it's not surprising that waves like these are a hazard to many other users on the lake. Finally, in terms of negative economic impacts, the damage to shorelines, especially beaches, shoreline infrastructure like docks, as well as moored vessels, can be pretty significant. Now, there are, of course, some positive economic impacts like revenue from tourism and the sale of boats, etc. But it's fairly widely accepted as well as fairly obvious that these positive impacts are relatively insignificant compared to the overall cost of the negative impacts. And they also tend to benefit a relatively small population. So, this excellent study came out last summer, driven by the St. Anthony Falls Lab at the University of Minnesota, which includes some pretty amazing videos that really demonstrate the impact of these boats on the lake bottom. There's a lot going on in this study. It is all available online. They basically had 3 or 4 different types of wake surfing boats, and they ran them along a course in a lake with instruments at various depths in surfing mode and in planing mode, and they collected all sorts of measurements to compare the impacts. So just so we're clear, surfing mode is when the boat nose is up, the prop is pointing at a steep downward angle, and the boat is plowing slowly through the water, generating these big waves, while planing mode is when the boat is going quite fast, it's planing on the water's surface with a more horizontal prop angle and generating much, much smaller waves. The highlight of this study for me is definitely the videos that show very clearly the effect of these boats on the lake bottom as they pass overhead. So I will show them to you now. Keep in mind as you watch the video that the bottoms of our lakes have gone largely undisturbed for thousands of years. Within all the layers of muck down there is a wealth of so-called legacy nutrients like phosphorus, nitrogen, organic matter, and they've built up over time and are not normally available in the water column. Phosphorus is of particular concern because it's generally in very short supply in our lakes. So when it suddenly becomes plentiful because the bottom sediments have been stirred up, it can contribute to algae blooms, which can be dangerous. So let me just switch my screen over here. On the left side of the screen, this is 2 videos side by side. On the left side, we'll have a boat passing overhead from the left to the right in planing mode. So it's producing small waves and a more horizontal prop wash. And on the right, we have one passing overhead in surfing mode, producing big waves and downward pointing prop wash. So you'll see when the boat goes overhead because you can see the shadow. There's the boat. So the video on the left has stopped because essentially nothing happens from this point on. This is after 5 minutes. Still quite a lot of material in the water column. And then 13 minutes later, the sediment has still not settled. These particles are very, very fine, so they take a really, really long time to settle out of the water column. I'm just going to pop back over to Zoom just to make sure I've given this presentation before where I lost connection and was talking to myself for 10 minutes. You're still there. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Um, so, so it's pretty clear then that enhanced wake activities come with a suite of negative impacts. But if we pop back to the Safe Quiet Lakes survey results for a moment, we can learn what it is exactly about enhanced wakes that has citizens concern. So in this survey question, here on the left, respondents were provided with a list of known impacts of enhanced wakes and asked to rate them from 1 to 5, where 1 doesn't concern them at all and 5 concerns them a great deal. At the top of our list of our respondents' concerns is the well-being of our waterfowl. This really surprised me. Maybe I'm too cynical, but I really thought people would be way more concerned about damage to property, for example, which is actually third on the list. But I guess there's no denying that we do love a loon around these parts. A close second, erosion of shorelines, unsurprisingly, because that's the most visible impact and potentially the most alarming to us as property owners. Of note, way down here at the bottom of the list of concerns is the disturbance to lake bottom sediments. And you now know that this is a pretty big deal, but not something that concerns a lot of people. So at Safe Quiet Lakes, we're using results like this going forward to guide our educational campaigns. This is something that people, and in particular boat operators, really need to understand. So before we talk about solutions, I want to highlight what I think are the three messages so far that I hope stay with you after this webinar. The first is that nearly everyone in cottage country ranks relaxing, swimming, and enjoying nature by the lake as important. 95% of people. It is hard to get that kind of consensus on any topic these days. Second, cruising on the water and traditional tow sports are important to many of us, about half, but non-powered sports are significantly more popular, important to 3/4 of respondents. Third, despite its growing popularity, wake surfing remains a niche activity, but one with some potentially significant negative impacts. I don't know how this makes you feel, but to me, it makes me feel like we have a clear responsibility, not only to protect our lakes, but also to ensure that enhanced wakes don't stop other lake users' enjoyment of the lake. So what do we do about it? Well, as with other human activities that can be harmful, we need to act in order to minimize these impacts. But how do we do this in a measured and fair way? Does this require an outright ban? Well, no, I don't think so. Well, an outright ban would certainly solve the problem. There are undeniably circumstances where enhanced wake will have a manageable impact. For example, in large lakes where natural waves will be of comparable size, or where there's room for wake energy to dissipate before reaching shore. What about education? Well, education is, of course, important, and organizations like Safe Quiet Lake have undertaken a lot of work in this regard, but we categorically cannot educate our way out of this problem. Education works best when combined with regulation, particularly when it comes to complex issues like vehicular operation, or frankly, when there are people who just don't care. The compromise, of course, is to implement operational limitations based on our current understanding of the societal and environmental impacts of enhanced wake activities. Together with education, we can achieve sustainable usage of these boats. And this needs to be our goal. Sustainable usage, where enhanced wake boats are used, but in a way to minimize the negative impacts. So if we were to regulate for sustainable usage, this has to be based on science. We really need clear objectives to minimize cultural eutrophication and to reduce other environmental impacts, as well as safety and property damage concerns. While ample research has been undertaken on the impacts of enhanced wakes, we really do need more research to determine what exactly this sustainable usage means in the many different settings where these boats are operated. There has been some progress in this regard, but one thing is clear: proximity to the lake bottom and to the shore is of overwhelming importance. So this means that we already have two key parameters we can use for regulating sustainable usage. We've got minimum operational depths to protect the lake bottom habitats and minimize nutrient resuspension. And we've got minimum distances from shore to give time for wave energy to dissipate before intersecting shorelines, infrastructure, and other lake users. In the case of minimum depths, the effects of prop wash on lake bottoms is pretty clear, and the science is broadly in agreement in this regard. Without a doubt, enhanced wake activities are incompatible with and unsustainable in shallow waters. And by shallow water here, I mean less shallow than you might expect. The research consistently shows that minimum depths of 6 meters are required for safe operation. Remember that in surfing mode, the prop is pointing down at quite a steep angle, and the wash can reach surprising depths. In fact, in cottage country with fragile ecosystems, especially in the vicinity of spawning beds, fish nursery areas, and other wildlife habitat, and where depth data is poor, a minimum operational depth of 9 meters has been reported as justified. In the case of minimum distance from shore, current recommendations in the literature vary pretty widely. For example, the boating industry has funded research that recommends a minimum operating distance of 200 feet from shore, which is about 60 meters. And this is what they use as the basis of their safe operation recommendations. However, you have to compare this to the minimum distance recommendations of 200 meters or more in the scientific literature. In any case, any minimum distance recommendation has to come with a caveat because this safe distance is going to be highly dependent on local conditions, especially shoreline and bottom characteristics, as well as presence of wildlife and such. So in cottage country, where lakes have fragile shorelines and vegetation, thin soils are susceptible to cultural eutrophication and or have vulnerable inshore lake users and infrastructure, we need to be considering higher minimum distances. Even 200 meters from shore is unlikely to be enough. So, how can we implement such operational restrictions in Canada? Well, until recently, the outlook wasn't very good. In Canada, the regulatory framework is such that the Canadian federal government has sole jurisdiction over boating on all bodies of water, where boating here includes every mode of transportation, commercial or recreational. This federal jurisdiction covers all signage to control boating and regulation of equipment, licenses, and speed limits. Unfortunately, provinces and municipalities cannot act without federal approval. And unfortunately, enforcement is pretty complex. It's delegated to the RCMP, provincial police, local authorities, and others depending on local scenarios. So it's a pretty complex landscape. Currently in Canada, as far as I understand it, we actually have no wake specific regulations like no wake zones, in contrast to popular belief. There are, however, some regulations that have wake implications. For example, most provinces have something like a 10 kilometer per hour speed limit within 30 meters of shore, aka the 10-30 rule. Muskoka is 930, of course. And although the criminal code states that boaters cannot operate in a manner unsafe to the public, and it is possible to launch a civil suit against a boat operator for damages, these measures are seldom used and they're wildly ineffective solutions. So until recently, that was really all that was available to us. Fortunately, while we wait for Transport Canada to figure out regulations at the federal level, municipalities can apply to the feds for a vessel operating restriction regulation, or a VOR. This has been around for a while, and VOR categories have traditionally included things like no boats are allowed, no power boats, engine size limits, no tow sports, no special events. But in late 2023, early 2024, the VOR 7.1 was introduced, which specifically singles out wake surfing. And this reflects Transport Canada's recognition that this is a sport unlike any other. A VOR can apply to a lake in whole or in part at any time, at a time of day or a time of year, etc. So this is where regulations could be implemented based on minimum depth and minimum distance from shore, but it's going to be on a lake by lake basis. Currently, of the roughly 250,000 lakes in Ontario, there are just over 300 VORs and counting. So it is an underutilized tool so far. So this is good news. However, there are some hurdles. First, The municipality has to be the applicant, and since this is a time-consuming process, municipalities are going to need support from lake associations, local interest groups, etc. Hopefully, Safe Quiet Lakes will be able to support this process as well. Unfortunately, this also means that a successful VOR will require municipal will, which cannot always be guaranteed. The VOR application requires a cost-benefit analysis be undertaken, showing that all stakeholders have been identified and consulted and that most agree. You do not need consensus here, but the view of all stakeholders must have been taken into account. VORs are granted based on safety issues, environmental issues, and other issues of public interest. Finally, VOR 7.1 application was taking more than 2 years to be approved, but new measures apparently have been implemented to shorten the process to 6 months, but this excludes the preparation of the application, so it's not a quick process by any means. I've just added a footnote here. We've learned recently that commercial activities like a resort that's operating a wake boat can be regulated potentially via their municipal business license. So this might have some potential in some circumstances. And of course, we are still learning. Maybe there are other approaches for change that we have yet to discover. So now that I've told you all about enhanced wake, their impacts, and about the regulatory framework in Canada, I'd like to tell you what we at Safe Quiet Lakes are trying to do about it. I'm excited to report that in 2024, Safe Quiet Lakes led the formation of the Safe Wakes Coalition, which is a province-wide and maybe someday nationwide group of stakeholders whose goal it is to reduce the impacts of enhanced wakes by driving behavioral and legislative change at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. Quite ambitious. We've had a lot of interest from stakeholders in Quebec and BC, and maybe as word spreads, we'll be able to enlist more partners nationwide. We've also had a lot of support from organizations south of the border in Vermont, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin, who are, of course, dealing with the same problem down there. And we're learning a lot from each other. The tools that we're using include education and awareness, promoting science-backed guidelines for those who want to act responsibly, and advocating for legislative change. Some of our members of the Safe Wakes Coalition include the Georgian Bay Association, MLA, Lake Joseph North Association, the Coalition of Haliburton Property Owners Association, and FOCA, who are taking part as an observer. We're always looking for more partners and supporters if you know any organizations that might be interested. And I'm happy to say that the Safe Wakes Coalition has been pretty busy. And I'll tell you a bit about that now. Our education and awareness campaign is really kicking off this summer. We've been working with scientists, municipalities, lake associations, residents, and responsible boaters to develop some new material to educate people about the potential negative impacts of enhanced wakes and to help raise awareness about how to wake surf responsibly and sustainably. This summer, we'll be distributing material like our Wake Surf Responsibly promo card here across Muskoka in the first instance, sort of as a pilot project, but the plan is to distribute these further afield eventually. I think the most impactful initiative, or potentially impactful initiative so far, will be our science-backed operational guidelines. We're promoting these to help boat operators use their enhanced wake boats sustainably and responsibly in the best interest of their lakes and neighbors. We're recommending officially that operators keep at least 250 meters from shore. This, in addition to protecting shorelines, will also protect lake users and infrastructure in the water close to shore. We are also recommending that they stay in at least 9 meters of water, which will protect lake bottoms even in highly sensitive areas and where depth information is poor. Associated with these recommendations are our better wake zone maps, which will show areas on a lake that satisfy our 250 meter from shore guideline, as well as a reminder about remaining in at least 9 meters of water. So we're making these maps available for download on our website as printable PDF maps, as in this example here for Lake Muskoka. But we're also providing them as KMZ files that can be used in mobile phone navigation apps like Google Earth. So in this case here, I'm not on Lake Muskoka, but if I was, when you're driving around in your boat, you'd see a little blue dot here on the map showing your live location relative to the Better Wake Zone on your lake. So we're also providing these maps as GPX files that can be used with onboard marine chart plotter. So I don't have one of these myself, but apparently you can upload these with it on a USB stick and put them into your chart plotter as a boundary. So as you're driving around and you get close to the edge of this boundary, it will send you either an audible alarm or a visual alarm to remind you to check your spacing in the Better Wake Zone. The launch of our pilot Better Wake Zone maps this summer will mostly cover Muskoka. So in the first instance, we're including Lake Joseph, Lake Muskoka, Lake Rosso, and Lake of Bays. But eventually our aim is to roll out maps anywhere they're needed, including Haliburton County. So I'm quite excited about that. There's a lot of work, but it's an exciting project, I think. While our guidelines and maps will help those who want to be responsible boaters, we'll continue to advocate for legislative change because there's always going to be people out there who aren't interested in that. This is going to be an uphill battle, though, since there are currently not really any obvious avenues at the provincial or federal levels for change. However, in the meantime, we are working to increase awareness of current regulatory options, as I have done with you today. And we're also aiming to help improve the efficacy of existing regulations, in particular by supporting VORS 7.1 initiative and applications by municipalities so that they can regulate enhanced wake on a lake-by-lake basis. One lake at a time, it's better than nothing. Finally, we are actively monitoring regulatory solutions in other jurisdictions and assessing if and how they could be applied here. So that's really all I have for you today. I'd like to take a second to give a shout out to our generous supporters. Thank you so much to the MLA in particular. We also have sponsorship from a number of municipal townships, lake associations, individuals, and the Coalition of Haliburton Property Owners Association. Our sponsors keep us going. We are a fully volunteer working board with one full-time staff member and one summer student. So we really depend on the cooperation and financial contributions of our sponsors. Finally, if you or your organization would like to know more or you'd like to partner with us as a sponsor, please don't hesitate to reach out to outreach@safequiet.ca. Also, feel free to contact me directly if you have any specific questions about the impact of Enhanced Wake or about any of the Safe Wake Coalition's initiatives. We're happy to help. We, of course, accept donations via our website. And at the bottom of the homepage, you'll find a button to sign up for our newsletter. So thank you so much for your attention. And I guess it's time for a Q&A discussion. I think we've left, can't quite see the clock for
We
15
actually have
minutes.
15 minutes. Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. That was really, really interesting. I have had the pleasure of listening to that presentation before, and every time it really just hits home on the damage that's being created in a way that can be so controlled by a changed behavior. And you've outlined the way that we can do that with distance from shore and depth of water. So I invite anybody that wants to ask a question to please put it in now. I do have a few that came in earlier, so I'm going to start with those, Tim. One of the questions was, do you know the depth of the instruments that were used in the video that you showed?
Yes, in the video that I showed, I think it was 14 feet. They've got quite a lot of videos. They did a whole range of depth measurements. If it's of interest to the audience, I can provide that with my slides, and you can actually go and look at all the different videos that this study provides.
So the depth that it showed was clearly not as deep as the recommendation that the
No.
coalition is recommending.
Yes,
Hence the
exactly.
damage that we saw with the the plants being thrown about and stuff like that.
Exactly, yes.
So if the instruments had been deeper than, say, the recommended 30 feet or 9 meters, we would not have seen that extent of damage then.
Yes, exactly. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I've actually looked at those videos. They they did, like I said, they did a number of different depths, but because the regulations that are being implemented in the States are pretty tight, I don't think they looked at depths as deep as we would go.
Hmm.
So this was the one I chose for the impact of the disturbance to the shoreline, because 14 feet is pretty deep.
Yeah, but still so much damage created.
Exactly.
Um, I have another question, and it's kind of similar to that. It was somebody asking if how the damage of wakes compare to the impact of the floods in the springtime. And
Um,
I mean, obviously,
that is an
floods are
interesting
natural
question.
phenomena, not controllable. And I'm not sure that they actually do damage at the lake bottom level. Maybe you can just talk
Yeah,
to
so
that.
in fact, I don't know the flood situation in Muskoka particularly. I have to be honest, I'm really surprised to hear how badly flooded the big lakes in Muskoka were this year.
Mhm.
Damage to shorelines, and anything really caused by water is related to the speed with which the water is moving, really, or the energy in moving water. So floodwaters in rivers can cause a lot of damage because, of course, the water is moving very quickly compared to normal conditions. But in lakes, the water doesn't tend to be moving all that quickly. I think where the floodwater damage comes from is because the water is at a level where it isn't usually. And if you have even normal sized waves at high water, it's reaching a part of the shore that it doesn't normally have access to. Um, as for how it compares to the damage caused by enhanced wakes, I couldn't, it would be a guess. I don't really know.
I don't know that there's any damage at the lake bottom level from
And certainly not at the
flooding
lake
the.
bottom. Yeah, certainly not at the lake bottom
No,
level because the water
yeah.
is, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't affect that part of it. Okay, thank you. There was a question asking if they can acquire a no wake sign. And yes, you can acquire a no wake sign either by contacting the MLA or contacting Safe Quiet Lakes. It's a very small fee. It's just a cost recovery, but they're available. I know that the MLA office has them on hand. You can stop in the township and get one. Another question that we had here was, have you found that Muskoka Town Councils are interested in or responsive to the effects of wakes?
From my perspective, I have not had a lot of contact with Muskoka town councils, but I have had quite a lot of contact with councils from the District of Parry Sound, and they have been really supportive of this and really interested. I gave a presentation at the District of Parry Sound Municipal Association and got a lot of very positive feedback there. I wouldn't be surprised if the Muskoka councils were similar. Do you have any sense of that?
I do know that one of the town councilors is working with a lake right now, actively working with a lake to help them get a VOR. So I know that the MLA or the Muskoka Township has one VOR that they are working with a lake association on. So I think that the idea is to approach your municipality and discuss, what the damage is, what's affecting it, what's happening, and then from there that they would follow a process that's outlined by Transport Canada to apply for that VOR, and that does include, inclusion of various stakeholders and all sorts of other things. But Safe Quiet Lakes has been walking some lake associations through this process. And if you're looking to do this, we would be happy for you to contact us and for us to try to help you through. Or if you don't know who in your municipality to contact or what department, again, we have some guidance that we can kind of offer in that capacity.
Can I
Um,
add? Can I
mhm.
add, if anyone is concerned that their representatives at the municipal level are not concerned enough, I strongly urge people to reach out because I know in Halliburton, in one of the Halliburton counties, the councillors are more afraid of the people that are operating these boats than they are of the rest of us. Like there is a
Mm,
very large group, a majority of people who are not happy with these waves, but we don't make as much fuss. We're not as loud. So I encourage anybody to speak to your municipal representative and make sure that they know that this is a problem in your area.
yeah, good point. Um, there was a short question that asked the board recommendation of 820 feet distance from shore. Most people don't know what that means. Do you have a way to translate that into a distance? And again, I think when I'm in my mind thinking of the new education postcards, we identify that space as 3 football fields. Is that
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I can't actually remember. I'll just have a quick look at my presentation here. It's in the poster. I think it was I think it was 3 football fields. Sorry, I can't get it. Yeah, I think it was three.
okay? Another question from someone was if you are able to get a VOR, how would that be enforced? And that is enforced through the OPP Marine Division. They have a full Marine Division out of Bracebridge that does enforcement across all of Muskoka and the I think the definitely the Halliburton area, but it's OPP. You actually can get private enforcement that lake associations or townships can pay for, but that's an avenue that you would go through on your own. But once a VOR is put into place, there is enforcement that's available. And even if an OPP is not present at the time, if you can get any picture and anything that describes the boat, and if you can, getting the boat number and reporting that to the OPP, they will go and make a visit to the owner separately. So there is enforcement.
This
Somebody
is a
asked if they,
question.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
the enforcement is a question that we get a lot, and I think you've
Yeah,
answered it beautifully. And I think another thing that people can do is I think people are taken much more seriously with the OPP and any by law enforcement that if it's more than just you that's complaining, if you can get your neighbors and other people to from different parts of the lake to also collect that evidence and report it, it makes a much stronger case as well.
I agree. Someone asked if they could get your contact information for follow-up.
Absolutely, yeah.
That will be available in the presentation notes, or do you want to give that
It's
out right
in the
now?
last slide of the presentation online, but maybe it could be included in the circular announcing that the presentation is on the MLA website.
Okay, thank you. And the visual on the presentation, which demonstrates the impact on shores and lake bottoms, would make a brilliant safety poster. Any chance of that happening?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you.
We
Thank you,
can add that
Tish.
to the to-do list.
Yeah, exactly. Um, wakes, okay. Make wakes, not wakes. Is there any requirement for boat sellers to give information about requirements to wake boat buyers? And I can
Good
say that
question.
there's no requirement, but most responsible, I think, sellers, if they have that information at hand, then they would give it to them.
And Diana,
Uh,
that's something I have not included in my presentation is that we are really keen for the marinas to be partners in this process to help, spread the word and share the education. And that is something I should really have mentioned.
yeah, agree. And then do we have time for, I think we've got time for just a few more. Um, My impression is that larger, faster boats, not just wake boats, make sizable wakes. Should we be concerned about their effects on the lake ecosystem? And again, I think from what you had said, there's some impact on shorelines with that, but not on lake bottoms.
Yeah, I think the really big, I mean, it's undeniable that large boats, and of course it's untrue that typically when a boat's going fast, they're planing on the surface, and so they're not actually making, no matter how big the boat is, if it's going fast and planing on the water's surface, it's it's not actually generating very big waves. It's when they're going slow and that nose up configuration where you're plowing through the water, wasting tons of gasoline. Um, and and I think it's true that a traditional boat, they can produce pretty big waves and they can cause damage, but they don't damage the bottom in the same way because those boats are usually more parallel to the water's surface, which means the propeller wash is going that way, not down. That's a very unique characteristic of wake boats. The other thing about the wake boats is that it's not just that the waves are big. They have these mechanisms below the water's surface that adds a steepness to the wave that
Mm,
creates more power, which means when it arrives at shore, it has much more energy than a wave from a traditional boat. So yes, true that traditional boats can cause some damage as well, but they aren't the same thing, and we're having trouble getting enhanced wake boats regulated. So I would hate to think of having to address the other one as well. But if we can get one done, then that's a pretty good start.
okay, that is wonderful. Um, and a few other comments, but not really um, questions. And I will end with the very last one that's on there, and it's a good closing. It says, excellent presentation. Thank you. So thank you, Tim. That was
Thank you so
wonderful.
much. Thank
All
you for
right.
everyone's time.
Thanks. So now just a couple of words from MLA. They have said that if you think of some additional questions, that they would be happy to pursue the response to that. And you can do that by writing an email to info@mla.on.ca, and they will try to route the question to Tim or somebody else that knows and get back to you. And this presentation will be posted by the MLA along with the presentation deck. So if you didn't take notes, don't worry. You can still share this with your lake association or your friends, or look at it for your own pleasure. All right. So with that, thank you again to the MLA for putting this together. Thank you, Tim, for an excellent presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Thanks, Diana.